Hey everyone. Today we're going to be talking about how racist French people can be. These are the Cagots. They are a group of people that the French and to a lesser extent Spanish hate for no real discernible reason. Not even the French can agree on why they hate these guys. But reasons range from being lepers, heretics, cannibals, body odor, which is pretty rich coming from the French, sorcerers, werewolves, deviants, or, much like Republicans, just being born evil. It was even an old urban myth back in France that just looking at a Cagot could make you sick, and as a result, it was a crime for them to walk down the street barefoot. The supposed origins of this group are pretty interesting. One legend says that they are the descendants of the carpenters who built the cross that Jesus was crucified on. But my personal favorite story is that the Cagots are ancestors of bricklayers who helped build Solomon's temple way back in the day. But they were expelled by God for being poor craftsmen, and thus he cursed their bloodline with leprosy. Do day do do da da. Laying bricks is my job and it's so much fun. Uh, hey, John? God? Yeah. You're not doing so good with this temple, so I'm gonna need you to get the fuck out of here. Oh, and your future descendants are gonna have boils. What a kind and compassionate being. That's pretty brutal of God, cursing an entire bloodline over some mislaid bricks. Another origin put forth by Pope Leo X states that Cagots came from a group of people from the Crusade times that were persecuted for heresy called Cathars. But this is pretty unlikely, as by the time of the Cathar heresy, Cagots were already getting hate crimed in France. And the Cathar heresy was happening in Italy, and it might shock you to learn this, but Italy is not in France. Leo definitely knew this, and it was likely he said this as an excuse for people to hate on the Cagots. Another potential origin is that Cagots were actually early adopters of Christianity, and when their pagan neighbors converted, they needed a new reason to hate the Cagots, so they just started calling them gross. Many psychiatrists of the time categorized Cagots as a subset of idiot and believed them to be intellectually inferior without the ability to become useful members of society, which would put them about on par with the average Frenchman. Cagots did have their own culture, but so little of it was preserved that just about everything we know of them is related to how they were prosecuted by the French, which is pretty sad if you think about it. Imagine your entire culture being forgotten because a Frenchman thought you were smelly. At this point, some of you may be wondering, Socks, how did the French know who was a Cagot? Well, I was getting to that, you ADD-riddled viewer. Basically, you were a Cagot if your parents were one. That's right. They had no way of distinguishing a Cagot from a non-Cagot. They aren't an ethnic group, and they usually follow the same local religions and speak the same local languages. You were categorized as a Cagot because you came from a family of one. This meant, hypothetically speaking, if I didn't like you and I got a whole town on board with calling you a Cagot, after a generation or two, I will have effectively made your bloodline a marginalized group. Yay me. Cagots were not allowed to marry non-Cagots, which meant a lot of intermarrying, and considering they only made up roughly 10% of any given town population, as you could imagine, this led to some pretty egregious mockeries of genetics. Other ways Cagots were ostracized included not being allowed in taverns, or being allowed to use public fountains, being buried in separate cemeteries, and weirdly enough, only being baptized at night, which I don't really get, but I'm not racist, so Cagots had a lot of restrictions around churches in general. They also could not join the priesthood and had to enter the church from a separate opening, and during service they were separated by a railing from other churchgoers, which sounds kind of familiar, huh, Alabama?
Not so fast, you Cagot. You's got to sit in the back of the church.
The French took that shit seriously, too. There is one account of a wealthy Cagot man who had his hand cut off and nailed to the church door for the monstrous crime of opening the door reserved for non-Cagots. Man, I bet these French guys in a three-lettered organization of sheet wearers would probably get along really well. Cagots would eventually partition the Pope himself for better treatment, and to his credit, he actually did try to help by issuing something called a papal bull. This is basically a public decree by the Pope telling all of his followers to do something. The Pope basically told French people to be nice to the Cagots and treat them like other Christians, but this was pretty much largely ignored by French people. Treat them like humans? Man, this is a load of papal bull. Cagots also could not have last names, which I imagine got really confusing. At some point, you just have to resort to a number system of some kind, or get really creative with names. Hey, did you hear Henry got in trouble? Which one? Oh, sorry, Henry VI. Oh, yeah, I heard him and Gefilte got in a fight. Something else that's pretty concerning with the power of hindsight is that the French forced Cagots to wear distinctive clothing with goose feet on them so members of the public could know who was a Cagot. Which, oh boy, gives shades of Germany, huh? Incidentally, recently in France, anti vax groups have been co opting both the goose foot and the Jewish star people were forced to wear by the Nazis for their anti vax protests. Because, having to give your kid a shot is definitely the same thing as being a discriminated minority group. Is my sarcasm coming through? I hope it's coming through. Eventually, the French government had had enough, and they started trying to rein in all its population. During the French Revolution, authorities started to claim that Cagots were no different than other French citizens, and eventually, a law was introduced fining anyone suspected of insulting a Cagot 500 French dollars. I don't know how to pronounce their currency at the time, sue me. During the chaos of the French Revolution, Cagots would actually storm record buildings and burn up their birth certificates in an attempt to hide their ancestry. But this usually didn't work because the French people in town just, remembered who they were. It's not like they disappeared when they burned up their birth certificate. There, now no one will know my secret. The whole town knows who you are. They know you're a Cagot. Nope, no paper. That means it's not true. No paper, can't prove it. Ha 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 ha. I'm not a Cagot. Following the French Revolution, the discrimination toward Cagots slowly did start to fade, and they assimilated pretty much fully into the French culture. Today, you'd be hard pressed to find them, as they are now a slowly disappearing group inside of France. So, there you go, everyone. Never let another European tell you they're better than you. They are just as awful and racist as us Americans. Thank you for sticking around so long. I hope you enjoyed. Leave a comment if you have something to say, and if you enjoyed it, go ahead and give me a subscribe. Or don't. I'm not your dad. Till next time.